Secure, contain, protect. These are jobs for an entirely different person. But today we're talking about just that first part, secure. Security guards have often tense jobs, watching over people or property. But when things get a little too scary, security guards just aren't paid enough for this crap. These are some allegedly true and creepy stories about or from security guards. If you have a story of your own, share it with us at darkstories.org. I'd really love to hear some stories about RVs, campers, and mobile homes or trailer parks. Also, excuse the sound of my heater in the background. I'm freezing here. Now, let's begin. The Bird Grabber, from Gerben. The second job I ever had was a night shift security gig. I was honestly quite surprised I got the call back on that one, as I'd hardly had any experience working anywhere. I was a 19-year-old sheltered guy, but I'd always been taller than my peers growing up, so maybe that had something to do with it. I lived in a small college town in New England. The security guard position had me looking after an old mausoleum containing some family tombs. It was autumn when I started, and with the trees being bare or nearly bare, the place was absolutely creepy after sundown. It took me a few weeks to stop feeling that sort of dread or fear you get when you're alone in a very dark and creepy place. But yeah, once everything became routine for me, that feeling went away. I ended up working there for 3 years. I quit after managing to get a scholarship to finish up 2 more years at university and finally finish up my bachelor's degree. I wanted to focus on my school full time. Anyway, my shift began at 10 p.m. each night, and I'd work until 8 in the morning. That meant 10-hour night shifts 5 days a week. It was a gravy job, honestly. It did not take me long to get into the flow and theme of the place. Remembering my rounds became second nature in no time, and I would often even listen to true crime and paranormal podcasts on my phone via Spotify while walking around in the dark. You could probably understand why, at a certain point, I believed that nothing could scare me, or that I was at the very least ready for anything. But then came the longest night of my entire life. This was the night that I saw something that I'll never forget and will never be able to truly explain. It was nearly exactly a year after I started, so that would make it autumn again. The leaves were just starting to turn this year, but the temperature was beyond freezing already. I was doing my rounds with a sweater under my blizzard-ready jacket. While between rounds, I would make sure to keep the coffee pot hot and full. You could call it cozy, save for the couple of hours of rounds I had to do. During my second round for that night, I got up and downed a cup of coffee. Then I threw my toasty jacket back on and exited the security building. This building was little more than a well-insulated shed. Before you could step foot in the mausoleum from there, you'd have to walk through a small outcropping row of trees via a footpath. This outcropping was pretty short, but it was thick enough that you could not see the mausoleum on the other side, adding a bit of suspense when you walked through the footpath at night. So I made my way through, and a few minutes later I was in the mausoleum, checking the tombs and gravestones for tampering, and making sure no teenagers were hanging out on the hillside, smoking it up or getting frisky. That happened quite a lot, believe it or not. I made my way over to the archway of the main family plot when I heard the shifting of tree branches. There was little to no wind that night, so the moment I heard that sound, I knew that some branches were being shifted around by an animal or person. I listened closely, eventually suspecting that the sounds were a bit too heavy and slow to be that of a squirrel crawling around on them. I laughed to myself, thinking about how awkward it's going to be when I have to make my way to the tree in question, only to find a couple of kids trying and failing to make out in a tree. I rounded the edge of the main plot, where a tall poplar tree had stood for ages. When I turned the corner past a stone tomb, I found myself in full view staring into something merely 7 yards away from me that shook me to my very core. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't blink. My body went as stiff as a freaking board. It was an instinctual response. I'd never reacted like that before. I was terrified. Now, I'll describe to you what I saw, but I'll admit here that it's going to sound insane. Imagine a man with no clothes or hair whatsoever on his body. Turn his skin pale and nearly a super light shade of blue-green, then slather him with a viscous slime. And to top it off, stretch him so that he's half the width of a normal man, but twice the height. That's what I was looking at. Some sort of creature that was a nightmarish deformity of a normal man. It was so freaking tall. It was using its lanky arms to slowly reach into the branches of the poplar, pulling and bending them toward its face. Then it picked at the bark with its face and fingers, like it was searching for insects or small animals to consume. And then the worst happened. I somehow managed to choke on my own saliva, causing me to cough just once. The thing steadily turned and lowered its head a bit, soon finding me with its odd-looking eyes. Its eyes were these flat, straight, horizontal slits. They were so thin, I couldn't tell if they were closed or not. But I guessed that they weren't, because it looked at me and cocked its head to the side. It saw me, but it didn't seem to care. A few seconds of studying me over, it then went back to the branch it was, feeling up. I turned, and I power-walked my way back to the security building. I could hear that thing chewing on something and pulling at branches the entire way back. I quickly locked the door, telling myself that finishing the rounds this shift was not going to happen. I was not stepping foot outside until the sun was up. I survived the night okay. Didn't see anything else out of place or weird. Now, I didn't straight up tell my coworkers about the incident, but I did ask the other guards about the creepy things they'd experienced working here. The older guard who'd worked there the longest had stumbled upon torn and fallen branches a couple of times. He'd even found half-chewed-up birds. Obviously, he thought this was odd. We didn't get enough wind around these parts to tear branches from healthy trees that often, and it was curious that the half-eaten birds he'd find were always next to these fallen branches. The other guard I talked to, a woman in her 30s, had frequently heard oddly heavy footsteps around the mausoleum, but she admitted she'd been too afraid to investigate when she'd hear these noises. Can't say I'd blame her. I never saw the creature again, but to be honest, that's probably because any further sounds similar to the ones that creature made, I completely avoided. I did not want to end up like one of those half-eaten birds or ripped off branches. Grave Shift Security Story from Kix037. When I was 20 years old, I worked at the University of Utah as a security officer. At that time, my now ex and I worked the same shift, which was the graveyard shift. Her name was Anne. Working on a big campus and also working nights, you always hear about haunted buildings, haunted places, all kinds of alleged spooks. Well, on this particular night, I was feeling adventurous and I wanted to show Anne that I was an adventurous guy. So I drove us to do a building walkthrough of one of the supposedly haunted buildings on the campus. We pull up, and right away Anne says to me, "I have a bad feeling about this. I don't think I want to do this." She was obviously uneasy, but again, I wanted an adventure. After a few minutes, I managed to talk her back into it, and we began to walk into the building. Right away, I felt goosebumps all over my body. The inside was so dark, there was not enough light from the outside coming in. Many corners and dark spots were sheer blackness. I tell Anne, "Come on, let's walk through the building and see what we can find." I didn't want to necessarily provoke anything. I simply wanted to see if we saw anything weird. It was uneventful. Nothing happened except the creaking of the building, which was normal. But that all changed when we made it to the basement door. I opened it and looked down into the basement. I was met face to face with that sheer darkness, now enveloping everything in front of me. You couldn't even see the stairs. I pulled out my flashlight and I began to head down the stairs when Anne tried to stop me. "Jeremy, no. This doesn't feel right. It feels like we're being watched." I pushed forward anyway, and Anne, too afraid to be alone, followed me, hanging on to my shoulder. We got off the stairs of the basement, and still I felt nothing. Yet the whole time Anne was telling me that we had to go back. The basement seemed empty except for cobwebs. I was scanning the basement, moving my weak flashlight slowly, when I noticed that the back corner had a small hallway that led to another room. I started walking towards it, and that's when things got weird. As I'm scanning the second room with the light, I notice that the only thing in that room is an empty chair. I scanned past it at first, not giving the object a second thought. It was when I was bringing the light back across the room when we noticed the chair was now facing a different direction entirely. It was now facing us as if someone was sitting in it and had angled themselves to face us. Right away, this startled me. I began to feel that watched feeling that Anne had had. We slowly back out of the basement, and I swear I felt as if someone was standing over me. Anik was in a full-blown panic. "Jeremy, we have to leave," she said. I nod. We start walking up the stairs, and the whole time I'm looking behind me, just waiting to see someone. We make it to the top of the stairs. Anne tells me she's going outside, and that I can stay in here as long as I want, but she's done. I tell her, "That's fine. Go sit in the car. I'm just going to make sure the front door is locked." Anne walks towards the back door where we were parked, and I walked around the corner to the front. I made sure the door was locked when I started to hear footsteps in the hallway behind me. "Anne?" I call out. I hear a few more distinct footsteps. I walk towards them, hesitantly, and I call out again, "Anne!" Just at that moment, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye by the staircase. I walk over to the stairs and stand and listen. Now I can hear footsteps upstairs, so I started to walk up them when I hear, "Jeremy, what are you doing? I'm not going back down there." I snapped my head up over the stair railing and saw Anne. She was talking to the open basement door. "Anne, what are you doing?" I said. She looked up at me and jumped. She was shocked. I saw you in the basement." "No," I responded. She continued, "You weren't just calling me back down to the basement?" "Jeremy, I heard your voice calling me from the basement." "Anne," I replied, I thought you were upstairs. I swear to God I saw you walking up the staircase." I saw the terror in her eyes, so we both flew out of that building as quickly as possible. Once we made it to the point where we were calm enough to think about the situation, I began to realize whatever was in that house was trying to separate us. Something wanted me upstairs, while it tried to take her down into the basement. I do feel bad because she told me the entire time she was feeling like she was being watched. She kept telling me that she wanted to leave, but I didn't listen. That was 5 years ago, and our lives have moved into different paths. I'm no longer with that university, but for anyone that starts as a campus security officer at the University of Utah, be careful of the buildings on Fort Douglas. Some of the stories you hear from that place are apparently true. Never Quite Alone, from Anonymous. My mom worked as a security guard for a company that sent her to various locations. One of the most interesting posts was at a popular soft drink factory. While my mom worked second shift, this shift still had very little actual workers present after around 6 p.m. or so. She would often regale me with stories of what would happen when she was all alone, or at least should have been alone. The most common incidents she would have would be hearing footsteps and the opening and closing of doors. These sounds occurred in the long corridor just outside her office and in the women's washroom down the hall. She said they never felt wrong or malevolent. My mom had worked there for many years. I would occasionally have to stop by or pick her up if we had to share a car for whatever reason. Due to this, I had on a few occasions witnessed the phantom footsteps myself. The first time it happened, my mom was so excited for me to experience it firsthand. I could clearly hear a man's heavy footfall back and forth all the way at the other end of the hall. "Now watch this," my mom excitedly exclaimed as she practically dragged me toward the sound. The sound grew louder the closer we got to it, but when we made it to the exact spot where the footsteps were happening, they went dead silent. If you didn't work there or deliver there, it was usually frowned upon to walk around inside the building, but I'm glad I had these experiences. Though creepy, they really show you that things go bump in the night, and they're not always so bad. Scary security guard in my building, from Anonymous. This happened about 2 years ago. I was 14 years old and pretty short for my age. I live in Canada, and I'd like to say I live in a relatively safe neighborhood. In my apartment building, I know everyone, even the staff, and because I'm so well known, the staff lets me and my friends wander around the building at night, so long as we keep quiet. You don't want to wake up the neighbors. One summer night, I was with my 2 friends, Jade and Derek. Jade, Derek, and I were walking around the building like we normally do, and had made our way up to the 10th floor to ask another friend if he wanted to come hang with us. Now, my building has 2 stairwells and an elevator. The 2 stairwells are on opposite ends of a long hallway, and the elevators are in the middle of the hallway. As we were walking towards our friend's door, we heard the stairwell on the opposite side of the hallway slam close, and there was a man walking towards us. The guy was huge. He was 6'8". He had gray hair and blue eyes, but only looked to be in his mid-40s. I had never seen him here before, and like I said before, I knew everyone in the building. This didn't scare me, but it did confuse me. The man was walking towards us, and I assumed he would just go to the elevators, but he didn't. He walked right past them. I knew for sure that he didn't live on this floor, so why did he keep going? My friend Jade finally noticed him, and as Derek also turned to see the man, the massive guy broke into a run and was coming right for us. Freaking out, I grabbed Jade and pushed her into the stairwell closest to us, yelling at her and Derek to run as Jade and I ran as fast as we could up the stairwell. We made it to the 16th floor before I realized that Derek was nowhere to be seen. We hadn't heard any footsteps, and our stairwell echoes loudly. I went back to look for him. I couldn't just leave him behind. So Jade and I ran back down, quietly opening every door to check for Derek until we found him on the 9th floor. He whispered to us to tell us we needed to switch stairwells and run down to the ground floor, the only floor with security cameras. The three of us jumped as we saw the man peering out of the stairwell, the one Jade and I had just come from. We bolted to the other side and ran down the stairs as fast as we could. We just reached the 4th floor when the door was heavily pushed open and the man stood there blocking our way. He began to scream and reach into his back pocket. He was holding something shiny and silver looking, but I couldn't see what it actually was before one of the neighbors came out of their room and asked what was going on. A couple of other sleepy neighbors woke up and entered the hallway as well. His expression turned to anger and fear. He obviously didn't want a commotion, and whatever he'd pulled out of his pocket was now back in his pocket. The man then walked away. We asked the neighbors who had come out first who he was, but she didn't know. This made me uneasy, obviously, and considering that I never saw the man again, even though we kept going out at night with friends, this led me to believe that he wasn't a security guard at all. But why was he dressed as one? And why was he chasing a bunch of children? Black-Eyed Trespasser from Yuri 78. I used to work as a security guard for a mall. I was the guy that had to lock up the doors after spending all day watching people a little too closely. I can't tell you how awkward it is and how irritating it is to have to go up to some teenagers on a bench and tell them not to sit in each other's laps. What a career. Needless to say, I did not enjoy the job, but something happened during my last year there that made me hate it even more. It had been a long day full of rowdy, disrespectful kids and a couple of dudes who thought they'd be just fine drinking whiskey from some brown paper bags. When closing time finally came, I was so ready to just go home. I needed some sleep and a double dose of ibuprofen. I had to make sure everyone was cleared out before locking up. There were 3 sets of doors that needed locked: the northwest, the east, and the south doors. The northwest doors came first, and that went without a hitch. But next were the east doors. The moment I entered the east corridor, I could see someone standing outside. "Please stay out there," I mumbled to myself. If they came in, I'd have to confront them and tell them that we were closed, hoping that they wouldn't start a problem with me. Oddly enough, they just stood there, just outside the doors, watching me as I walked the full 30 yards or so to get to them. This took a moment, so seeing them stare at me for an awkward amount of time was pretty weird, to say the least. When I made it to the glass door, I saw that it was a woman. She appeared to be in her 20s. She was attractive and bore a big smile, which was quite warming to see, until I got a better look at her eyes. They were solid black, like someone had managed to pour a gallon of black food dye into her eye socket. When I saw this, I froze, and after a moment I opened the door slightly and spoke. "May I help you? We're closed for the night." She didn't hesitate to reply, nearly interrupting me. "May I come in for a moment?" Her voice was so monotone, while her expression was very animated. It seemed so off-putting. "We're closed," I repeated. If you need to use a restroom, there's a McDonald's just a block that way, I pointed. You're going to die, she said. Her smile didn't change. The hell did you just say? May I come inside for a moment? There's not much time left now. Chills ran down my spine. I immediately closed the door and began locking them. There were about 8 doors there, 4 sets of 2 doors, and I was at the leftmost set. As I worked my way down locking each set, she followed me to each one, still smiling. I started walking away, considering calling the cops. Before I rounded the corner to the last set of doors, I looked back, and she was still standing there. I rounded the corner, speed walking to the doors. I was terrified she'd be there when I looked, which wouldn't be possible. It would take her much longer to get to these doors from the outside, due to the auto shop attached to that wing of the building. When I made it to the doors and looked up for my keys, I nearly screamed. There she was, right up against the glass with those black eyes and that eerie smile. I quickly locked those doors, then retreated to the security office, never looking up and never looking back. I was good to go home, but instead I clocked out and waited 2 or 3 hours, checking the corridors often. I never saw her, but I didn't believe for a second that she was gone. When I did have the courage to go to my car, I ran full speed like a scared kid. It was the creepiest moment of my life, and I'm so glad to not have to work there anymore. If you want me, Darkness Prevails, as a security guard for you, just call 1-555-555-DARK, and I'll come protect your stuff badly. That's 1-555-555-DARK. I'm the perfect protector if you really hate the things you own. Good night. If you enjoyed this episode of Darkness Prevails, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If you have a story of your own, share it with us at darkstories.org. I'd love to hear stories about RVs, campers, mobile homes, and trailer parks. If you want to support the show, check the links below. There's a link to my Patreon and a link to my merch store. Now, as usual, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous episode about 5 terrifying things seen in the wilderness. Cody Tyner says, "Dang, why can't you make more during the weekend when I'm not working? I'm trying to. Depending on the stories and the quality of writing, it can take between 5 to 8 hours to put together a single episode. But I agree, the more episodes, the better." Trent Lindsay says, "Oh, I made it to number 4. I'll take it. Greetings, Earthlings. Please, alien Trent Lindsay, just take me off this planet and dump me somewhere better. Like the burnt side of Mercury. Thanks." Christina Felger asks, "Why do we have to tie ourselves to trees?" Well, if you want to really see some scary stuff in the woods, but you don't trust yourself to not run away when the creepiness goes down, you've got to tie yourself up. Trust me, I've done it once. Lindsay says, "Bigfoot's toe hair would be better." Well, I've already got plenty of that for the both of us. It's always getting knotted up in my socks. And AJ King says, "So, any hunting stories?" Heck yeah, we've got tons of hunting stories. Is that what you guys want next? Let me know in the comments. Well, that brings us to the end of this Darkness Prevails episode. But don't you worry, more scary stories are on the way soon, so stay tuned. Until next time, here are the credits to my amazing patrons who continue to donate. They're awesome people. Remember, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.